This week, Conflict Zone is at NATO headquarters in Brussels, and my guest is its Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg. Facing mounting security challenges, the alliance is required to project strength and unity, but is struggling on both counts. Meanwhile, Donald Trump says NATO is obsolete. Is he right? Jens Stoltenberg, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you so much.
You keep saying you don't want a new Cold War with Russia and you haven't got a new Cold War, but you're getting to be in the minority there. It shows all the signs of being a Cold War. Why don't you admit it and deal with it?
Because we are not in a Cold War, partly because we don't have the two military blocs confronting each other, the Warsaw Pact and NATO. The Warsaw Pact doesn't exist anymore, the Soviet Union doesn't exist.
But Russia certainly exists.
Yes, but
Russia is upping its arms, China is upping its arms, the United States is upping its arms.
But Russia is not the Soviet Union, and the Warsaw Pact doesn't exist anymore at all. But we are in a difficult and challenging security environment in Europe. We are not in the partnership we tried to develop after the Cold War, but we're neither in the Cold War we had before the fall of the Berlin Wall.
People at the coalface have a very different interpretation. Even your deputy commander of NATO forces in Europe, General Sir Adrian Bradshaw, said last year tensions with Russia could blow up into all-out conflict, posing an existential threat to our whole being. That's pretty Cold War-like. You've got the head of German intelligence, domestic intelligence, saying the old methods of the KGB are back. You've got the head of British intelligence, MI5, the domestic service, saying increasing threat. Russia poses increasing threat to UK stability in increasingly aggressive ways. That is a Cold War.
I think we have to be very specific and very clear about the
They're being very specific.
Yeah, I understand that, but the thing is that we have to describe the reality as it is without exaggerating and talking up tensions. And
but you seem to see a different reality from the people on the ground.
I see
the intelligence services and your military commanders.
No, I see a more assertive Russia. I see a Russia which has implemented a substantial build-up, and that's exactly why NATO has implemented the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense since the end of the Cold War, with deployment of troops in the Baltic region and in Poland. We have tripled the size of the NATO response force to 40,000 troops, and we have established a high readiness joint task force exactly as a response to a Russia which has significantly increased its military presence.
So you're on high alert, right?
We have increased the readiness.
Are you on high alert?
We have increased the readiness of our forces. We are ready to deploy forces on very short notice.
Because all these experts are signaling that you need to be on high alert. That there are increasing threats to the stability of countries like the UK from Russia. Doesn't that require a high alert?
That requires a proportionate, measured response from NATO. And that's
why play it down, Secretary General? Why play it down?
And that's exactly what we have delivered by increasing military presence in the eastern part of the alliance.
This is diplomatic speak. Why play the situation down?
For me, the important thing is that we react in a measured way. We don't see any imminent threat against any NATO ally, but we see more Russian presence, and we see a Russia which has been willing to use military force against neighbors, Ukraine and Georgia.
No imminent threat, and they're talking about uprated propaganda, espionage, subversion and cyber attacks. Russia has designated you a threat to its national security. They did this in January, their new security assessment. They think of you as a threat, even if you don't think of them as a threat. Isn't it time you uprated your ideas to coincide with theirs?
Well, we have done a lot since 2014, when Russia used military force against Ukraine. And we have implemented the strongest reinforcement of our collective defense in Europe since the end of the Cold War.
So you bolted the stable door after the horse had gone.
But this is about finding the right balance between providing a military response, providing credible deterrence, but also avoiding escalating the situation and increasing tensions. And NATO is responding exactly in this way because we convey a message of strength, of unity, but also a message that we continue to strive for a more constructive relationship with Russia, because Russia is our neighbor. Russia is going to stay there.
Let's talk about deterrence, because you haven't managed to deter very much these days, especially with Crimea and Ukraine. You certainly did nothing to deter their military action in Crimea. They crashed through an international border. NATO didn't even see it coming, hadn't the slightest inkling that it was coming. And in April last year, the former Supreme Commander of Allied forces said there were critical gaps in NATO's collection and analysis. Some Russian military exercises, he said, caught us by surprise, and our textured feel for Russia's involvement on the ground in Ukraine has been quite limited. That's a shocking gap, isn't it? Shocking gap. Critical gaps in NATO's collection and analysis, and you say you're projecting strength.
You have to understand the difference between NATO doing its core task, which is to protect and defend all NATO allies. And we do that every day. We provide credible deterrence, and that's exactly the reason why we have seen no attack against any NATO allies.
You're supposed to also deter threats to international peace and stability, and this was a huge threat to international peace and stability, wasn't it?
I'm doing my work based on the treaty, the Washington Treaty, which is the foundation for the NATO alliance, and the obligation of NATO is to protect and defend all NATO allies.
How can you do it with critical gaps in your collection and analysis of intelligence? Who's responsible for the critical gaps in NATO's analysis and collection of intelligence? Who's responsible for that?
I am responsible for what NATO decides and what NATO does. Then we have 28 allies providing capabilities, providing forces, so we are an alliance of 28
But not very effectively, if you can't even see snap exercises coming from Russia.
We are the strongest military alliance in the world. We are the strongest military force in the world. We provide deterrence every day.
But can't see Russian exercises coming. Can't see them coming.
And we are doing more, especially when it comes to situational awareness, intelligence. And that's exactly why we have invested more in intelligence, why we are developing new capabilities, and also why we now see for the first time in many years increase defense spending among European NATO allies. We made a decision in 2014 that we have to stop the cuts in defense spending and gradually increase towards 2%.
Secretary General, you know there are only 5 out of 28 countries that actually pay the 2%.
The encouraging news is that we have seen that more than 20 allies have now started to increase defense spending in real terms. The decision we made in 2014 was not to reach 2% next year, but it was to stop the cuts. The cuts have stopped. It was to gradually increase. We see a gradual increase in defense spending, and we saw it in 2015 and we saw it in 2016, and that's the first.
It's still a long way from getting to where it needs to be and where you want it to be, and where NATO requires it to be. It's a long way.
Well, we have new allies which have reached 2%. We have Poland, we have Estonia, and then we have all the other Baltic countries and Romania, which is now very close to reaching 2%, and they will reach 2% within a few years.
It may do. You don't know when.
Well,
you have no idea when it's going to get up there.
What we have seen is that defense spending actually is increasing, and it has done so for 2 years. Second, we have seen very strong commitments and plans in different NATO allies to continue to increase. But I am not saying that everything is fine. I'm actually traveling around to NATO capitals and telling them every day to do more, to increase defense spending and to invest more in our collective defense.
You've been powerless to stop or deter the Russian bombing of Aleppo, which has led to terrible suffering and what the UN calls war crimes. 28 nations in NATO powerless to prevent this bombing. Since all practical cooperation has apparently ceased with Russia, you have no levers on which to persuade them, no levers on which to compel them, and you sit and watch the bombing of Aleppo take place with massive civilian casualties, and you can do nothing to deter it. So much for NATO deterrence. It's not working, is it?
But I think it's very,
it's not working.
But I think it's very dangerous to mix what is going on in Aleppo and Syria, which is of great concern. It's horrific. It's a humanitarian and human tragedy, all the civilians that are killed there, with the core task of NATO to provide deterrence for all NATO allies. Syria is not a NATO ally, so we should not, water out the core responsibility of NATO, defending, protecting all NATO allies.
I'm not watering out. I'm just saying that you're sitting back and watching the Russians dominate a region in which NATO has key interests,
yes,
which is the Eastern Mediterranean. When Russia began the major operations in Syria, it gave the US Air Force 1 hour to get out of the skies. That was how little they thought of them.
But again, I think we have to understand the difference between NATO's responsibility, which is to defend, protect all allies, and we are doing that, and we provide credible deterrence every day. We have seen no military attack against any NATO ally for almost 70 years. Then, of course, NATO is also concerned about what is going on outside, beyond our borders. All NATO allies participate in the coalition fighting ISIL. NATO, as an alliance, provide direct support to the alliance fighting ISIL with our AWACS surveillance planes. And we have started also to train Iraqi soldiers and officers, because I believe that in the long run, the best way to project stability is not by deploying large number of combat troops on the ground, but it is to enable local forces to fight ISIL themselves and to defend and protect their own country. And that's exactly what we are doing.
You have talked about your commitments to NATO members, particularly under Article 5, which means that an attack on one country is seen as an attack on all of them. But it's clear that you can't meet these commitments, because if you look at the Baltic states, for instance, war games conducted both by the Pentagon and other groups in Washington have you losing comprehensively in the face of any Russian advance on the Baltics. You cannot defend the Baltics. And all the war games that have taken place at the Pentagon have proved that. You can't meet those commitments.
We can meet those commitments. We are able to defend.
So why have you lost in all the war games? But why have you lost every time they've war gamed it?
Because they lost. No, because they are based on the kind of assumption that we're not able to reinforce. NATO is there with troops. We have increased our presence in the eastern part of the alliance with battalions, but we don't believe that battalions are enough to protect the Baltic states. We need the national home defense forces of the Baltic states, but perhaps most importantly, we need the ability of NATO to reinforce if needed. We have tripled the size.
But you don't have that ability. You have the head of force planning at the Pentagon saying, we just don't have the forces in Europe. NATO is unable to defend the Baltics.
Well, we have already tripled the size of the NATO response force.
It's not enough, is it?
We have 40,000 troops, which is 3 times as much as we had just a couple of years ago.
Against 320,000 troops on the Russian side.
But we have 3 million people in uniform in the alliance. So we have developed new plans.
So the new battalions that are going into Eastern Europe are neither here nor there, are they? I mean,
well, the battalions are...
They're 4,000 troops.
But 4,000 troops being multinational troops...
Against 320,000.
But the battalions is one element of a comprehensive approach. The battalions will be multinational. They will be led by the UK, by US, by Germany, by Canada. And there will be many NATO allies contributing.
Finally, it's taken you a long time to put them together, these battalions.
Well,
a long time and a lot of resistance to doing it.
Well, I think that NATO has been able to react very rapidly to a changing security environment.
Rapidly? You've taken well over a year to put these battalions together. Almost 2 years.
We started to increase our military presence in the eastern part of the alliance, actually back in 2014, and now we are stepping up.
Secretary General, 30 months to put together 4,000 troops and 4 battalions.
But that's not the only...
With disagreement from key allies along the way. And you say NATO values unity. You don't have unity.
We had a summit in July where we made all the decisions by unity.
But this was first mooted in September last year.
No, we had also a summit
and even further back. You know this.
I know.
It's been mooted for a very long time, and it's taken you a lot of time to put these 4 battalions together.
I know that we responded immediately after the illegal annexation of Crimea. Then already we started to increase our presence in the Baltic region with air policing and with more exercises. Then we have further strengthened our presence with the 4 battalions.
30 months to put them together. 30 months.
But they know that we are there to reinforce if needed. And I'm from Norway, and the northern part of Norway is bordering Russia. It was part of the coldest part of the Cold War. We never had forces in the northern part of Norway able to stop the Soviet Union at the border, but we knew that the United States, the United Kingdom, the whole NATO alliance was there to reinforce, to protect us if needed. We were even able to deter an attack on West Berlin. No one thought that we had the forces in place in West Berlin during the Cold War, surrounded by East Germany and Soviet tanks.
Well, you keep telling me the world has moved on, then the world is a very different place, and you haven't got the Soviet Union.
But I am telling you
you've got
that
new leaders in the Kremlin who regard you as a threat to their national security.
We were able to even deter the Soviet Union from attacking northern Norway with hardly any troops, no NATO troops at all there. And we were able to deter the Soviet Union from attacking West Berlin.
Mr. Stoltenberg.
So of course then, by sending a clear message, one for all for one, NATO solidarity, we will be there to protect deterrence.
When we were able to do that, 30 months to put together 4,000 troops.
When we were able to do that during the Cold War, I'm certain about that we are also able to do that with Russia, which is not as big as the Soviet Union, and a Russia without the Warsaw Pact.
All right. Let's talk about the values of the NATO alliance. Ash Carter, US Defense Secretary, said, our member nations share common values reflected in the way we conduct ourselves. Really? You think you share common values with Turkey, a country that has just clamped down comprehensively on free speech, a whole history of trumped-up charges against writers, academics and military personnel, wholesale arrest of judges, prosecutors, police, anyone who's investigated the government? You share values with this country?
Turkey is a key ally for NATO for many different reasons. Not least,
you share values. This was my question. You share these values with them?
Turkey is a member of the NATO alliance, and the alliance is based on core values. Democracy.
So they're human rights. Well, they don't have democracy at the moment. They seem to be arresting everybody who has a contrary view to the government.
Turkey experienced a coup attempt in July. And of course, they have the right to prosecute those responsible.
You're telling me you have no concerns about the human rights in Turkey whatsoever? You're just turning a blind eye to this.
I am telling you the background for what is going on in Turkey right now.
But I'm asking you whether you have concerns about their human rights record in Turkey, or you turn a blind eye to it.
I have, in my meetings in many NATO capitals, also in Ankara, underlined the importance of the core values for NATO.
That's the best you can do in the face of what is going on inside Turkey?
I have expressed that I personally attach great importance to those values, the rule of law, democracy and individual liberties.
But they don't seem to be there, do they?
But I also underlined the importance of being able to prosecute those responsible for the failed coup, that they are prosecuted based on the rule of law. And I also welcome that the Council of Europe, which is the custodians or which are responsible for the European Human Rights Convention, are in close dialogue with Turkey.
And you're not prepared to give them one word of criticism, are you? One word of criticism
NATO
for this shocking
clampdown NATO is a military alliance based...
I understand, but then you trumpet the same values. You say we're all having the same values. And when I ask you whether you have the same values as people who are violating human rights, you avoid the question.
Then I respond to you what I have done, and I have underlined the importance of these values. But I'm also telling you that Turkey is a key ally because it's a location close to Russia, the Black Sea, Crimea in the north, but also bordering Iraq, Syria in the south.
So now you're telling me they're too important as an ally to question
I'm just
on
telling
the human
you
rights
that
issues.
Turkey is important for NATO for many different reasons. Part of the geographical location, partly because it is the ally that has suffered most from the violence and instability in Iraq and Syria, many terrorist attacks, and they have received 3 million refugees.
Okay.
All of this.
But Turkey is not that keen on NATO these days. Turkish Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu said in September, Turkey wanted to cooperate with NATO members up to this point, but the results we got did not satisfy us. Therefore, it's natural to look for other options. So this isn't an ally who's very pleased with your alliance at the moment. You say solidarity is a key value for NATO. Your solidarity is looking a bit tatty on the southeastern flank, isn't it? Turkey is insisting that NATO end its counter-migration operations in the Aegean by the end of the year. You want to continue with them. There are key points of disagreement that you have, major points of disagreement that you have with Turkey at the moment.
Well, NATO is an alliance of 28 independent sovereign nations, and there are very often different views, different opinions inside.
This is a major split. This is a major split.
But it's nothing new that there are different opinions. For instance,
this is not. We did not get the results that satisfy us with NATO. That's directly from the foreign minister.
As far as I remember, those statements came as reaction related to what we call NATO's assurance measures in Turkey. NATO has increased its presence in Turkey to mark or to show solidarity with Turkey in a very difficult situation close to Syria and Iraq. We have delivered many of those measures, but not all of them. Mm-hmm. And I agree with Turkey that and I try to encourage NATO allies to deliver all the agreed measures. So that's one example.
You have strong disagreements with Germany as well. The Foreign Minister Steinmeier criticized military exercises in Poland. He said they're counterproductive. He said NATO should stop saber-rattling and warmongering. That's pretty powerful from the German government.
But again, I think we have to understand that in an alliance with 28 open democratic societies, there are different views. Foreign Minister Steinmeier and I absolutely agree on the need for both.
What, that you've been warmongering and saber-rattling?
No, on the need for strong collective defense in Europe, including exercises and political dialogue with Russia. And again, what counts is that after we have debated, after we have open discussion, which I think is part of a democratic open alliance.
He's telling you ease off. He's telling you ease off, Secretary General. You know perfectly well he is. He's telling you ease off the Russians.
We met all of us in Warsaw, and we made the decisions both on continued efforts to improve our political dialogue with Russia, to avoid a new Cold War, to avoid a new arms race.
Only 9% in Germany, only 9% in Germany agree that Berlin should be reinforcing these battalions in Eastern Europe. Only 9%. And the real challenge to NATO, Secretary General, is the lukewarm support for your cornerstone principles like Article 5. Last year we had the Pew Research Centre reporting significant reluctance among key countries in the EU to come to the aid of any NATO country attacked by Russia. At least half of Germans, French and Italians say their country should not use military force. So this is where your alliance has got to. You cannot bring the populations of Europe to actually support your key cornerstone principles. This is a major failure, isn't it?
Again, in democratic societies like Germany, there are different views, there are different opinions.
But you're supposed to bring public opinion with you, and you failed to do that.
And I would always like to have as much support for NATO policies as possible. But what counts is that we have democratic elected governments in Germany and all the other NATO allies which have again and again committed to our collective defense, to the NATO solidarity. And actually Germany is a lead country when it comes to deploying forces to the eastern part of the alliance. Germany will be a lead for the battalion in Lithuania. They are lead when it comes to our high readiness joint task force, the force that can reinforce if needed. And they are playing a key role, for instance, when it comes to more exercises in Europe. So what we see on the ground is a willingness of Germany to be part of this collective defense and protect all allies.
And what you see in the United States is one of the presidential candidates, Donald Trump, who says NATO is obsolete and is costing us a fortune. And he's accused Washington's NATO allies of ripping off the US and says either they pay up for past deficiencies or they have to get out. And if it breaks up NATO, it breaks up NATO. This man could be president-elect in less than a week's time. And this is a fundamental challenge to NATO's core existence that you have to deal with.
I'm absolutely certain that the United States will understand that also in the future a strong NATO is not only in the interest of
You're certain
Europe,
on the basis of what?
But also
what Donald Trump is saying?
Also in the interest of the United States. I will not be part of the US election campaign, but what I can say is...
You won't even stand up for NATO?
No, but if you don't interrupt me, I'm able to finish my sentence, because what I can say is what matters for NATO. And that is that we are defending each other, that our security guarantees are not conditioned, they are absolute. We don't say that we only protect you if you pay. We defend and protect all allies without any conditions. But then, of course, I would like NATO allies to invest more in defense, and that's exactly what they have started to do, and I welcome that.
Jens Stoltenberg, thank you very much for being on Conflict Zone.
Thank you.